Hey, what's up guys? It's Alex from A Performance. Today we're going to talk about the L15 and why I think it's the worst motor ever made. I want to start off by saying I know a lot of people are going to hate this video. They're going to think that I'm stupid. L15 is the greatest motor ever, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if you're just keeping the car stock and driving to and from work, I think it's okay. Maybe on the same level of like a GTI maybe or something. It's not, I don't know. I don't see this motor making it the 200,000, 300,000 miles without like a turbo failure or head gasket failure. It's pretty much impossible. But so I'm going to go through all the components of the engine. I have everything here laid out. It is a little oily because I did just take the motor apart. There was oil all up on the main caps, kind of leaked on here. I'm just trying to do this quick. I got a bunch of motors I got to finish up. So we're going to try and run through this pretty quick. We're going to start off with the block. This is the L15 block. This is one from an L15 B7 Civic Si. The bore is 73 and the stroke is 89. It's not really ideal. We're going to talk more about it when I talk about the cranks. So that's the number one negative. The sleeves seem to be okay. I don't think I've seen too many sleeves crack. That's the only good thing about this block. I don't like the size of the mains. They're pretty small. And then if you look here, if you look over here, you could see, look at this. You see how there's two holes here? There's this little pinhole and this bigger hole. When you get to the middle one, let me see if I can put this on so you could see. When you have every other one only lets oil through here, it doesn't let oil through here. And like I can understand, you know, they use 0-20, they want to save gas, less resistance, less oil, but all of that really has nothing to do with horsepower. That's not what you want. You know, to build these motors, you want to get a little bit looser clearances than what they come with stock. Probably ideally drill this out a little bit to let oil go through all the holes on all of these. But the problem with that is Honda's been on back order with these bearings for a while, and the ones, you know, I don't know if you guys know, but Honda bearings come in different color codes. Maybe here you can see it on this one. Yeah, here you can see, I don't know if you can see right here, there's green. So if I want to get the loosest ones like the reds or whatever that Honda has, they don't have them in stock. So I want to loosen up these clearances and I really can't. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and polish the crank forever to get to that point. This is another green one. Just makes it stupid to build. But yeah, the oiling system really isn't that good. This is the oil pump. It rides on the crank like a B series. The problem with these is the gears tend to break. I personally never seen a gear break, but I've had these fail. I had a customer that came in and it was a motor that I built from about a month ago. He called me and said, "Hey Alex, I'm not getting no oil pressure." I told him, "Turn it off, let's bring it to the shop, let's see what's going on." I ended up pulling the pan, I pulled off a rod bearing, and it looked absolutely perfect. I looked at the other rods, I'm like, well, you got no problem with the block. And we ended up just changing the oil pump, and when we changed it, it fixed the issue. The car made oil pressure no problem. When I opened the old pump, there was just some scratches on the gears, but I guess that's all it took for it to break. So that's pretty much it for the block. You know, you're starting off with a bad oiling design. So now we're going to talk about the crank. All right, so now that we covered the block, we're going to go over here and compare the crankshafts. So this is an L15. All L15 cranks are exactly the same. As far as I know, they're all the same part number. I don't know if the 11 gen has a different part number, but from what I understand, it's like the Accord L15, which is the same crank. So one thing you can notice right off the bat is the counterweights. The L15 crank is missing half the counterweights that this has, and this is a D series crank. Now what that means, you know, they put the counterweights on here so it's balanced for high RPM. This crank is not going to be happy at high RPM. It's just not. It's half the weight. It could flex way easier than something like this. So let's say you're making 600, 700, 800 horsepower. This crank is just, it's really just not going to be happy. You know, it has a really thin design over here. And then another thing to note is the size of the journals. So the journals are bigger on the D series. They're also bigger on the rods. And what the general rule of thumb is when you have more surface area for the oil, you can hold more power. I would assume that their thought process in doing this is, you know, thinner oil, less surface area, less resistance, more gas mileage. That's seems to be the theme of everything they did with this motor. And the last thing to point out about the crank is the stroke. So the stroke is 89.4, which is comparable to something like a B20, which doesn't rev that high. You know, a B16 has a really short stroke. A K20 is an 86 by 86, where the piston is 86 millimeter. This is a 73 millimeter piston. So we got a bigger stroke than a K20 with smaller pistons. Now, what that means is the motor doesn't want to rev high. That kind of rod to stroke ratio is to make torque. And, you know, if you're going to put cams and you want to try to make high end power, you know, being a 1.5, you're going to have to put a big turbo, you know, and it's just, you're fighting against the crank because the crank is just not designed to do high RPM. The bearings aren't going to be happy at 8,000 RPM. The crank is not going to be happy. The crank might flex. If the crank flex, it's going to wear out the bearings a lot quicker and you're going to have issues. You know, there's not too many high horsepower ones where I can even tell you if this crank will survive high horsepower for a long amount of times, because everybody that made over 500 already blew up. You know, the PRL car, as far as I know, it blew up. I know the MAP car blew up, the MAP performance car. There was another guy that did a world record of like 680 horsepower. It literally exploded on video. So there's not that much research, you know, on this crank surviving a lot of high horsepower applications, but you're starting off on the wrong foot. It's the wrong stroke. It's a bad design. It's just really bad. I mean, this is one of Honda's weakest cranks before this crank, and you can already see it's really not even comparable. This looks like it would handle double the horsepower of this, and then let's not even mention the K-Series crank, which is on a whole nother level. You know, this can do 8, 9, 10,000 RPMs out the box. No issues. This is going to give you issues. So that's the issue with the crank. So you have a bad rod to stroke ratio and you have bad oiling. So you got two things off rip that are they're not working with you. And then on top of that, let's talk about the rod. All right, so here are the rods. I have another couple rods for comparison. This is a K20 C1, or actually this is from a C4 from an Accord, but it's the same style rod. K20 A2. L15, L15, L15. This is a stock rod that has no damage on it. This is how it looks out the box. This is from my personal SI. This is about 1,200 miles of 300 torque. What happened was the rod bolts actually failed, went around, hit here, snapped the rod clean, and this came out the block. So, you know, the rod bolts are the big issue here. So right here is one out of a K20 A2, and this is out of an L15. And, you know, it's hard to tell unless you see it in person. So this is a 10 millimeter bolt for like an oil pan. And look, that's what's holding your rod together. Now, I mean, I really don't have to, I don't know. To me, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this is a bad idea. You know, these hold 500-600 horsepower on boost, 9,000 RPM. Then they went to this. I mean, I just can't believe it. I mean, I don't know. Look, you could even see here on video the 10 millimeter Honda bolt is actually thicker than the rod bolt. Now, obviously, this is a stronger material, but it's unacceptable to me. This is just absolutely. This is crazy. This alone is like, when I saw this, I realized this motor had a lot of issues. The minute I saw this rod bolt, I knew not a lot of people were gonna last that 300 torque, and that's why I'm making this video. And a lot of companies are kind of making it seem like, oh, you can do bolt-on tune, you can make 300, it's gonna last long, you shouldn't have any problems depending on the tuner, and if you limit the torque, this, that, and the other. This is the problem. Doesn't matter who tunes your car, doesn't matter what parts you put on, this bolt is an issue regardless, even stock. This is just, you know, you're on borrowed time the minute you're making 300 torque. There's no way around it. This is just a complete disaster. you know. And if that doesn't break, this is what happens. The rods are bad too. This is a bent rod from a customer making around 275 torque. His motor started making probably like 250 torque, because it was just it was like a shelf base mat, like a stage 1 when the car first came out, and he only had an intake, maybe 250, 270 torque. Yeah, his car started making like a knocking kind of a sound, but he had oil pressure, and this was actually hitting the side of the block. And yeah, it didn't even hold up. So the rods are terrible rod to stroke ratio, terrible oiling system. So we're gonna go to the head stud. All right, so here's a stock L15 head stud. Here's a stock K series head stud. It's really, you can't really see it in the video. You can feel the weight in the, I don't know, it's like you can feel the quality of the metal compared. This feels really rinky-dink and light, almost like some kind of pot metal. I mean, obviously it's not, but it feels pretty bad. These don't hold up good. The heads constantly lift. If you're full bolt on tune and you don't snap a rod, you're gonna break a head gasket. These are $36 from the dealer. I mean, that should really tell you that these are poor quality. If you look up the K series ones, I'm pretty sure they're over 100 bucks for all of them. These are a replaceable item. This is not meant to be reused for sure. You cannot reuse this. These are torque to yield bolts. They just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand why they didn't put something at least this size, you know. Full bolt-ons tune, you're at like 30 PSI. This is not gonna work good. The Hayabusa head studs that everybody puts in here don't last long. They only torque to 60 pounds. They're just as thin. The clamping force, you know, is not that strong. And the thing that people don't realize is when you're making 300 in this, people think, oh, it's just 300 horsepower. This motor isn't thinking, oh, it's just 300 horsepower. This motor is fighting for its life. It's at 30 PSI, you know, 25 to 30 PSI. The head gasket is like, what the hell's going on? You know, the head studs are having an issue holding down the head. You know, nothing is happy. You take a K series at 15 PSI with a bigger turbo making 500, the motor is going to be way happier. You know, all these other reasons, you know, that the motor is going to be happier, but the head is going to be way happier also. I mean, you just, I just don't understand why they did this. Alright, so let's talk about this disaster of a head. So, you got a single exhaust port, doesn't flow good at all. Intake ports don't flow good at all. There's no port injection, it's just direct injection, so there's an issue, you know, with getting fuel to the motor. That's for another topic. So basically this head doesn't flow good. So I've seen Skunk 2 was making cams, so what's going to happen when you put cams in valve train? The block is not going to be happy. Let's say you're revving to 8 grand, 8,500, you know, your rods aren't going to work out. Even if you put forged rods in here, your crank's not going to be happy. Your oiling system is going to be terrible. You're just, and then, you know, the head gasket issue. Let's say you make 400 or 500 horsepower. You're going to be changing your head gasket every 4 or 5 months at, you know, at minimum. And a lot of people buy these cars, they're on payments, and they're a daily. And why would you put yourself in that kind of position when it's your daily? And it's gotten to the point where I don't even build these anymore because it's constantly issues. You know, after a couple months, you have a head gasket issue. The head gasket job costs 18 hours. You know, when you look up the labor rate, it's just, it's not a good platform to build. I feel bad taking people's money to build something like this. You know, after spending $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and then you got to upgrade the turbo, and it's just, you're fighting against everything that doesn't want to make everything on this engine is to make fuel economy. That's it. That's what everything really looks like. You know, they made everything lightweight. It's a long stroke, so you have bottom end torque. You know, this head is terrible. Another thing to note is these aluminum rockers. Now, you know, they went to aluminum to be lighter, obviously. I have noticed that these can strip out very easily if you do a valve adjustment. That's one thing to note. The aluminum seems to be pretty poor quality. Other than that, it looks like the head should be okay for higher RPM. I don't see anything on the design that wouldn't let you do higher RPM, but like I said, Even if you fix the issues with the head and port the head and do this and that, your head studs aren't going to clamp down good. So you're going to want to either have somebody, you know, drill these out and put bigger head studs. And then even at that point, you have all the issues with the terrible rod to stroke ratio. So you're just, I don't know. It's not a good idea to build these motors. That's my personal opinion. Like I said in the beginning of the video, this doesn't apply too much to people keeping these cars 100% bone stock, but I mean, come on guys, this is not ready for 300 torque or 300 horsepower. It's just, it just really isn't. Doesn't matter who tunes it. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people are gonna comment saying, oh, their friend has been making X amount of power for this amount of time. All right, there's still a bunch of people that have blown up. I've done about 20 of them that have all blown up. All these cars, most of them have under 10,000 miles. So hopefully this can help somebody out if they want to make a decision on purchasing this car and you think you're going to do bolt-ons and tune and everything is going to be all great and dandy. Might not work out that way. It might, but it might not. So if you guys have any questions, just comment below. I'll try to answer everybody's question. If you hate me and you think I'm an idiot because this is the best motor Honda ever made, please tell me why in the comments that I'm wrong. I feel like I've explained a lot of issues on why this motor is just not a good motor. Like I said, tell me why I'm wrong. I'm down to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe for more content. Thank you.